Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the AutoTrader Podcast. My name is Wandile Sishi, once again joined by the one and only George Mienie. How was your weekend, George?
Oh, no, good. Very good. You're back with South Africa's #1 motoring podcast.
Yeah.
Been going for how many years now?
What, the podcast or?
Yes, the podcast.
It's before my time, so.
I think it's a good
7
years. Yeah,
6 years?
It's 6 or 7 years. Yeah, I think you're right. You're right. I mean, we're sitting in 2022, I think we started 6 or 7 years ago.
It's evolved quite a lot.
It is.
And now we're in a position where we even have visuals, which is amazing. How times have
for
changed.
everybody else's benefit, before we started the show,
Where is this going?
This is like, because we all know Leclerc won the Formula 1 Grand Prix, right?
He did.
Which I'm so stoked about.
What a race,
we didn't see that coming. But, a very, very good kind of duel between him and Verstappen during the last parts of the race. But the point is, we were having such a laugh because Renault decided to edit Wandi's face.
And he's editing in the back. He just doesn't want to let this go. So
because for everybody else's benefit, Wandi is a avid Mercedes-Benz Lewis Hamilton fan.
Yeah, the biggest.
So that was such a funny visual, and
what an exciting race! I mean, it's great to see that Formula One is once again in a position where fans can really fall in love again. So I loved it. I love seeing the battle between Charles and Max. And I lost my voice screaming for Hamilton when he came third. So
I think he was, he was destined to not get onto that podium from the get-go.
Yeah, from 2 weeks ago.
From 2 weeks ago already. I think their car is just not up there. I mean, him and Hamilton and George Russell are performing in very similar kind of times. And their car's just not as strong as the Red Bull or the Ferrari. Well, the Red Bull's not strong because it broke at the end. Yeah,
I think the Red Bull Max was driving, that car to the end, but every single Red Bull except I think Yuki Tsunoda and AlphaTauri was the only Red Bull that actually made it to the end of the race. So there's some serious issues there with the power units.
So let's see what happens next time. But I'm super stoked that Ferrari's up there. Ferrari's really kind of like, it's come from literally from behind.
And the way they did it was just, you could tell, you can see how happy the team was. You can see how much they put all the efforts into the they never gave up, and that's kind of the spirit of F1. You should never ever give up because it can change.
Yeah, it can change quickly. Exactly, very quickly. The new cars look nice.
Stunning, I love them. I think the Ferrari is the best looking personally. But I mean, across the board, it's just. You
think it's the colors? I mean, they all look similar.
I think it's that red. The red looks a bit deeper. Don't know if it's me.
I think it's more matte.
It's got that
matte tinge to it.
Yeah.
But the cars look lovely. They look a lot sleeker. They don't look like antiquated 1980s Formula 1 cars. They now look like
futuristic kind of,
Formula 1 cars. Yeah, they look very nice. Anyway, we're not here to talk about Formula 1. What are we here to talk about?
Today we're talking about car recycling. So I don't know if you know this, but car recycling is actually one of the biggest and fastest growing industries in automotive.
Didn't know that it was the fastest growing, but let's just kind of get a definition out of the way. And that is recycling or refurbishing.
Recycling. So we're going to be talking about the entire package. So, if we want to go into refurbishing, let's get into that a little bit as well, because I think there's different. Because,
let's just define recycling versus refurbishing, right? Because for me, recycling is you actually take the various components out of whatever you're recycling and you use those in other things.
Just different things, exactly.
Like for instance, you would take the copper out of a starter motor and use that copper in another application. Yes, completely. That for me is recycling.
Yeah.
Refurbishing is turning an old unit back into
it's kind of reusing and making it good again.
Making it good again, yes.
Yeah.
So which one are we talking about here? Both?
We'll be talking about a little bit of both.
Okay.
But specifically for all intents and purposes, we'll just summarize it as just car recycling.
Okay.
So we're just going to go into a little bit of how much of a car is recycled. I think a lot of people don't know how much, cars are actually recycled.
Wow. Like now that I think about it, it's not something I've focused on, but car recycling is...
It's huge.
It's potentially... huge. I mean, how many components, products, elements, things are inside a car that can be reused? I mean,
well, that's the thing. So in America, let's use America as kind of the basis because I think they have a lot of data, for one. But they reported that about 95% of all the vehicles that get scrapped essentially become recycled.
Wow.
But, in America as well, they have scrap yards and there's so many different, I guess players in the recycling process. Whereas in South Africa, I don't think we get to those numbers. I think there's still a lot of work that we need to do in order to get to a point where we're also recycling and seeing these massive numbers growing.
Well, I mean, do we recycle in South Africa?
I'm pretty sure we do.
Cars, I know that is, not other stuff.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's a large sector that's dedicated into.
I know we recycle plastic because maybe recycle is not. Yeah,
I think it's kind of there's a difference between recycling and kind of storing something that's not used anymore responsibly. Does that make sense? Because I think when it comes to recycling, like you're saying, you have to actually go and take out all the components and reuse it.
Yeah. Well, reuse it in another application.
Exactly. But in South Africa, I don't think we're there yet. I know a lot of the automakers, do what they can to kind of get rid of all the junk, but it's not 95%.
So where's the stuff piling up? Maybe it's going out of the country. Maybe the recyclable elements in South Africa are going out of the country. It'd be interesting to dig into what happens to our vehicles.
Yeah.
When they reach the end of their life.
I know a lot of places in the world, they just give Africa, they used
yeah, vehicles. But that's used refurbished stuff, I'm assuming.
But even destroyed vehicles still come here and then they become recycled here, if that makes sense. And I don't think we should consider that as part of like recycling, in my opinion.
Okay, but we're probably getting sidetracked.
Yeah, for sure. So essentially, the components that get recycled on a vehicle's tires, windshield, batteries, so the steel, wheels, radiators, basically everything that's not necessarily plastic. I think plastics that's the biggest challenge in the recycling process because, it's kind of hard to reuse plastic, especially when it's, there's so many different types of plastics and there's different ways of dismantling them. But pretty much everything else in a vehicle can be recycled and, a lot of the automakers are focusing on that now because it saves a lot of money. I saw a number somewhere saying that by recycling, for instance, you're using about six times less energy in reusing that part instead of remaking it.
Well, I mean, I suppose a lot of the elements that would have to be turned from a raw material into that particular thing is already in existence, so you don't have to kind of have that first stage of turning a raw material into whatever it, like for instance copper. We pull copper out the ground.
Exactly.
Got to take off all the sand and stone and other metals that are there in order to refine the copper into a usable state. Now, you imagine taking copper out of a starter motor, for instance, or even an electric motor in today's EVs.
Yeah.
That copper is pure.
With the EV, I don't know if you know this, but do you know how much of an EV is recyclable? Because I would assume that a lot of the vehicle is pretty much the same. It's just the one component that's
Well, I mean, if you think about an EV versus an ICE vehicle, EV 200 moving parts, ICE vehicle north of 2,000 moving parts, right? So just in that itself, an EV would have less oils and gases, a lot less oils and gases. So I think an ICE vehicle from a liquid oils and gases recycling point of view, an ICE vehicle is going to give a lot more, EV is going to give a lot less. But then again, you're going to have a lot more coppers and wires and metals inside the EV that versus an ICE vehicle. Yeah. And then let's not talk about the lithium ion.
I mean, that's the big challenge with EVs is that components.
Yes.
That's the one that is freaking everyone out a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you can recycle it, but it's dangerous.
So I've heard that, it's not the same thing as just taking out the battery and throwing it in a machine that kind of squishes it and,
No, you've got to be careful because, this thing is highly combustible.
Do you recycle in your personal capacity? Just out of curiosity.
Do I have a recycling plant in my backyard? No.
I mean, specifically, like, I don't know, I'd like, do you have a recycling bin, for instance?
Is that your phone?
It is.
Is it Charles Leclerc calling?
It's definitely not Charles Leclerc.
I think it's Hamilton calling because he's upset with your image.
So do you know how recycling is done? It's actually a quite interesting a process that I, kind of...
Do I recycle? Well, I mean, I don't think anybody recycles, really.
I recycle.
Do I put things in bins to recycle? Yes. Yeah. Where I can, but that doesn't make me a recycler. Doesn't make the answer to that question yes.
That's true. I mean, I just have a recycling bin, but what happens afterwards is
out of your control and out of your visual. So is that stuff being? Have you gone to visit the plant?
I haven't.
So you're making yourself feel good.
I am making you kind of ruined all of that now. I thought it was recycling. Now
but you probably are, and you're doing a good thing. Don't stop doing it. But what I'm saying is it doesn't make you a recycler. It just makes you kind of like try to do your bit for the environment, which is a good thing.
Yeah, well, look, it's one of the fastest growing industries, specifically in cars. Like I said earlier, it's currently projected to be worth around 7 trillion rand.
Lithium ion or cars?
Car recycling. Well, specifically, this is the EV recycling side of things. Is 7 trillion. So, with the world moving into this place of EVs, it begs the question of, what opportunities exist now, because we know that this is happening. We know the challenges that exist. How can we kind of use that to our advantages as a country and as an industry is my big question.
Well, I mean, I think we recycling of traditional ICE vehicles. The world knows how to do that, and we do it well, according to everything that we've researched. But the challenge is going to become the lithium-ion batteries.
What is the challenge with the lithium? Do you know exactly
the volatility
of
the product itself? Because you're going to be able to extract its various components, and I think that is quite an intensive process and might be bad for the environment as much as actually making the battery in the first place. So recycling that lithium-ion battery, what do we need to use in order to recycle? Are we just kind of, do we have to use a coal power station, for instance,
to
recycle something that's creating clean energy? And how efficient is that? I think that's the big debate is how much efficiency we're really getting out of these lithium-ion batteries, given the recycling after the fact.
For context, about 5% of a lithium-ion battery can be recycled. That's a scary number, and it's something that we definitely have to address before there's hundreds and thousands of these vehicles, and we just have all these components that we can't.
I think the train is bolted.
For what?
You won't. I don't think we'll stop that. We won't stop the production of lithium-ion batteries. So we've got to figure out the recycling problem.
Yeah.
Like EVs are mandated by Europe.
Yeah.
It's growing hand over foot in America. China, it is already grown hand over foot, and they're all using lithium-ion, unless we come up with a different technology.
Do you think that lithium-ion is going to be the be-all and end-all of EVs as a whole?
Well, I mean, there's this new technology called solid state. That is, because lithium-ion is liquid. It's a liquid state battery. It's got liquid between the layers. And solid state really is really just replacing that liquid with a solid.
Okay.
It charges quicker, but it also degrades quicker. So that's the problem with solid state at the moment.
Yeah.
Whereas lithium-ion doesn't degrade as quickly. So it's anybody's guess as to
what kind of happens next.
What happens next? But at the moment, lithium-ion is where it's at.
There are a lot of car companies and automakers who do take this extremely seriously. I know, for instance, with BMW, I think they were one of the first to commit really to ensuring that almost the entire process or the vehicles that they're currently building are from recycled parts. So I know, with EVs coming along, how's that going to impact that goal of being able to kind of reuse and recycle?
Well, I mean, if only 5% of the lithium-ion battery can be recycled, that brings your percentage of recycling the entire car down dramatically, because the battery is one of the biggest components. But you're still going to be able to recycle the rest of the car.
Yeah.
You're going to be able to extract the metals and the elements out of whatever's in the car.
Yeah. So there's 4 basic steps in the recycling process. So the first one is basically you take your car to a recycling place. They basically detail it, do an inspection, and they say that about 90% of cars can be dismantled and reused. Who knows how much that is in South Africa? I don't believe.
Well, that's the difference between the refurbishment and the recycling, right? Yeah. So, if you can, and that's what scrapyards are for.
Yeah.
Scrapyards effectively then sell the scrap, or they dismantle and they sell the usable parts to whoever maybe they refurbish it, and then it goes on to the consumer and and gets reintroduced into the system, and then the balance then will go off to get recycled.
Yeah. Second step is draining fluids and dismantling, and I think this is where the EV problem comes in, is because of that liquid state and all those chemicals. This is where the challenge is kind of being fought now by the industry, and why it's kind of the big challenge. Next is just selling all the parts and then crushing whatever's not needed to turn into the next sort of thing.
So I believe that crushing and shredding a car, the car comes down to the size of a microwave.
Apparently, yeah. Roughly the size of a microwave oven, from that big giant car to.
I suppose there's a lot of space and air between, everything. If you really compact anything, you can get it down to a very small, it's a very small spot.
But yeah, so I mean, it's a really simple process, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for people to kind of see how they can take advantage of that, because it's a fast-growing industry which needs to be kind of extracted.
I mean, everyone's touting the problem that we're trying to solve as being the CO2 emissions. Okay, and it's a real problem. I'm not taking anything away from that for a second, and we do need to solve the CO2 problem, but the CO2 problem parked one side for a second. Isn't the EV transition also about a simpler, better technology?
Well, I think there's 2 sides of this. There's the industry side and there's a consumer side. I think consumers, that's the main focus. But I don't think we can ignore the fact that even with producing EVs, the CO2 emissions are still very much there. If not more so.
But with the recycling of the lithium ion, are we producing more harmful kind of things to the environment? I suppose that's the question. But that aside, if recycling a lithium ion or lithium ion in batteries in EVs in the future, right?
Yeah.
Is equal to slightly better.
Okay.
Than CO2 emissions out of ICE vehicles today.
Okay.
We've won.
We have won.
Because the technology
is better as well.
Is better and simpler, and the cars potentially last longer.
Yeah.
So therefore, yes, we want to reduce CO2 emissions, but anything below what we currently do is a win.
For sure.
It doesn't have to be binary. You don't have to go from like everything to nothing.
To zero, yeah.
We just have to incrementally get better. Plus, we then get better cars, simpler cars, quieter cars.
In a scenario where we don't get to that point where we can actually recycle batteries, I think it's going to be worse then.
Why?
Well, it's harder. It's harder to kind of, recycle an EV car. And if we're struggling now, if we can only get 5% to recyclable states, and we get to a point where most cars are EVs, then I think that scales in a tip in favor of the ICE vehicles again.
Well, I'm hoping that battery technology kind of turns that on its head.
Only hoping.
Yeah.
Only hoping.
So moving to solid state, different battery technology. Maybe something's going to happen like did with Moore's Law, where the technology doubles every single year. Yeah. And we get to a place where this isn't a problem.
For sure. So let's talk about some of the car companies that are actually focused on this. I'm going to focus on just 3 right now. So I already spoke about BMW. They actually have a vehicle recently which was it looked like an i3, I think it was the iVision or something like that, which was almost 100% built out of recycled material.
But didn't they do that with most of the i3?
I'm not sure about the i3, but this specific one was.
So I know the dash and the material on the seats of the i3 was all
mostly recycled.
Mostly recycled materials.
Yeah. So they have a big push towards this, but we'll see what happens. Mercedes-Benz the same. They also essentially they focus now on plastics, so how to really recycle a lot of the plastics in their vehicles, because the metal's kind of easy. And then Audi is doing extensive research with regards to a similar challenge of getting the plastics to a point where they can start recycling those. I mean, for any company, this will save them a lot. It's kind of a small thing that you think of that most people don't think of when they buy a car. But, you know, a lot of your car could potentially be almost fully recycled.
Well, I mean, I guess unless you change the state of something, or you put it together in a way that's very difficult to dismantle, everything should be recyclable. I mean, plastic is an example of something that we created that is just taken over the world. That is hard to deal with.
I'm gonna wait to see this. I'm gonna follow this quite closely because I want to know if the EVs would kind of cause a problem or a solution to the recycling.
It's only the lithium ion.
But that's a big part. That's like the entire part.
It's a massive part of the car. It's probably the biggest part of the car.
Yeah.
And I mean, something that I think is not a well-known observation, and that is when a lithium-ion battery gets to 80% of its usable state, it's actually considered the end of its life.
Yeah.
When it gets to 80%.
But that takes what, like 10 years?
Yeah, it takes a good 8 to 10 years to get there.
Yeah.
But then you got to replace the battery or replace the car.
Yeah.
So, at some point we're going to have to see EV batteries that get replaced in cars.
Yeah.
Because the car is going to outlast the battery effectively.
For sure.
If it's a really well maintained car, and then I think the other thing is, besides switching out the battery, we could potentially see EVs that have different battery technology where the battery will outlast the car. Because at the moment, I think the car is going to outlast the battery.
In a scenario where you have a hybrid vehicle, do you think it's even more tough? Do you think you still have the same problems? Or do you think hybrid vehicles are more recyclable than like an EV?
At the moment, it's more recyclable because if you think about what a hybrid is, hybrid is an ICE vehicle driven by electric motors that charge a very small battery. So the lithium-ion component is very small. It's really small.
I don't know. Maybe hybrids are, kind of a...
It's a complicated thing, because if you think about what a hybrid is, it's really just still a petrol
really
engine with
nice
2,000 moving parts.
Yeah.
Not really going forward in technology at all.
Yeah, no, that's true.
I think we would be reducing CO2 emissions in hybrids, so that's a good thing. So hybrid is the middle step, but it's not the ultimate game. I don't think it should be.
Okay. Interesting. That's pretty much all the time we have for this episode. Is there anything that you want to kind of leave us with?
Go Leclerc.
I knew we were going there. Thank you so much, George.